Welcome to Hear In Hanover, your all-access pass to everything happening in Hanover County. I'm your host, Kristen Smith Dunlop. Welcome to May. Today we're going to reflect on the past, and we're going to do that by talking about the Hanover Museum of History and Culture. Some of you may know about it, others may not, and that's what this podcast is all about, sharing more information with all of the residents of Hanover County. So the museum itself is here at the county government complex, and it reflects local history, Hanover history. Here to talk more about it is the museum manager, Mark Newcup. Hey, Mark.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
Let's share with people that might not be familiar with the museum, first of all, what it's all about and what makes it unique.
Well, it's not unusual for a county to have a local history museum, but typically those would be run by a nonprofit or the local historical society. What is unique about the Hanover Museum, it is part of the county government. I report to the Parks and Recreation Department, and that means I have some resources and some access that other museums might not have. And it also becomes very important to me then to represent the entire breadth of Hanover County as a result. It's, not one particular agenda or one particular neighborhood we're reflecting. We try to reflect the entire county.
Okay, so how do you go about choosing the exhibits? And do you get the community involved in that process?
That's a really great question, and I have to get the community involved. I'm only a recent arrival in Hanover County, so I'm not steeped in the history of the locality, but I have been a lifelong Virginia resident. So I know that broader sweep of Virginia history, but learning Hanover history is something that I've been doing over the last year since I've been employed, but it's going to probably take a few more years before I'm really comfortable with that. So for me, when I'm looking at the exhibit ideas or the direction we want to go, if it's interesting to me as a semi-outsider, it's probably going to be pretty interesting. But we do get feedback. There is a Hanover County Historical Society, and they know the history really well. So engaging the community, engaging the citizens of the county and asking them, what do you want to see in the museum? That's actually the best feedback I can get.
Okay, so let's talk about what you've got in there right now.
Two exhibits right now. The first one is a exhibit on the Brown Grove community, which is a historic African-American community founded in 1870 here in Hanover. And oh my goodness, it's almost difficult to explain in just pure words because that's what the exhibit does. We have artifacts, we have imagery in there that manage to convey so much about this community, which are lifelong Hanover residents, and their families have been here since colonial times. But seeing some of these families, their photos are absolutely amazing, and I think that is one thing that when people go into that exhibit that they'll take away is that connection, that everybody knows what a Coke is. Everybody knows what it's like to go to church on Sunday. Everybody knows what it is when your daughter or your niece wins a beauty pageant. Those are universal feelings, but this community is doing a really good job of keeping those stories alive, and now they're taking the opportunity to share them with the rest of the county.
So what has their reaction been to the exhibit?
Generally speaking, thrilled. It was a partnership with a lot of different groups. Operation Understanding out of George Mason University. So a lot of the text and the oral histories that one would hear in the exhibit are been put together by those students. And then I took my expertise and took the data, the information they collected, the artifacts they had gathered, and put it into a museum format, which isn't as easy as it may sound. You're not just putting artifacts out. You have to take these big, complicated ideas and long, complicated stories and turn them into short, understandable bites. But that's what I was hired to do.
Did you learn anything while putting this together?
This was a great experience, a really good way for me to begin learning about the history of Hanover County. Not necessarily going all the way back to the county's founding, but instead being able to engage with people who are aware of their history and want to share that history. And since I've worked on this project, I've met many more people who live in the county who have that same passion that, they have a real stake in how this county is perceived. And they're affected by the changes. And I think it's a great resource having a museum to be able to share those stories.
Okay, so we're going to shift gears now to Teetotalers and Moonshiners. Now, that's a fun title. Tell us about that exhibit.
That is a traveling exhibit that we have on loan from the Virginia Library, and they were kind enough to loan it to us. My belief when you do a museum is you try to mix and match a little bit of things. If all of the topics are exceedingly close to each other, you're probably going to get everything mushed together in your brain and not hold on to it. So by having different topics side by side, it makes it a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting. And Prohibition's a great topic. It's highly romanticized as a result of movies and television. But for Virginia overwhelmingly voted for Prohibition. And the effects were almost unforeseen, that it was going to cause a major illicit people producing their own alcohol at home. And one of the fun things about the exhibit, which is really neat and well done, we got to add a little bit to it using local resources. But in one of the panels that came from the Library of Virginia, you can actually look and see who the Prohibition enforcer for Hanover County was at the time. And it turns out it was a relative of Sheriff Nance. So.
Oh, okay. Well, so how did Prohibition impact life here in Hanover?
It doesn't appear like it was a major alteration. There were no breweries in Hanover County. Places in Fredericksburg, Alexandria, Roanoke, they actually lost businesses. Certainly, if any bars or taverns that were open, they had to close or they had to change and just become a restaurant or something like that. But again, talking to local residents and their recollections of great uncles and great grandfathers, people began producing their own alcohol. Because they simply couldn't buy it at the store anymore. And it's actually not that complicated. And I think Hanover has a long tradition of independence and independence-minded individuals. So the fact that they were producing their own alcohol really, Hanover weathered the Prohibition probably pretty well.
Okay, so two great exhibits, very different ends of the spectrum. People should come by and check that out. What are you hoping happens when someone comes to visit the museum?
We're not a very big museum. So Brown Grove is an in-depth exhibit. Prohibition is kind of a more cursory look at things. And I've only been with the museum for a year, but we have a vision, an idea that when people are coming to the little historic area at the courthouse, that they can come into the museum and be introduced to Hanover history. And certainly both of those exhibits do it. And then take that little bit of knowledge and start checking out the rest of the county. So I think what we would like to do, we being the Parks and Rec Department, who I do the planning with the museum about, is think about those things. What makes Hanover Hanover? What are those great historic stories, particularly the ones that haven't been told? We can introduce those to the public. And if it's a bigger story, Henry Clay, something like that, we can refer them to other great historic sites in the county. But if it's an unknown story, that's where I think the Hanover Museum could excel. Something that is a little bit off the beaten path, something that is very interesting in particular to the local audience, and bring those stories to light.
I imagine you're looking for those little stories now.
Exactly. Bring
them your stories.
Yeah, that's a great idea. This can't be done without the community. Lifelong residents, they know their families. They know what they were told. They know what they experienced. And if they have a story, an artifact, a memory that the history of Hanover County is not complete without, I would love for them to share it with us.
And of course, all of this is very timely right now with the country getting ready to celebrate its 250th birthday.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Hanover's a little bit older than that, 300 years old and counting now. But I think that that's a good opportunity to take advantage of all of the historical events that are associated with Hanover County and with Virginia in the early Revolution, and I really hope that it gets people thinking in that historic mindset of, where it actually happened, why it happened, how it happened. And, that's what museums are really great at, is trying to explain those or point out the questions about that so that people can look into their family history or think about, momentous events that are changing the course of their county, their state, and their nation.
Anything else you want to share with us?
Right now, the museum is open Wednesdays through Saturday from 10 to 2. Our hours are flexible. If you needed to come by on a Sunday or a Monday because your group is having a meeting, then please give us a call. All of our contact information is on the county website, and we're happy to try and work with people. And that's where they would get in contact with me or the Parks and Rec Department if they have a great Hanover story that they want to share.
There you go. You can share it with them. Thank you so much. You are very genuinely excited about history and about what you do. I mean, it radiates from you, I guess.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really hope that was one of the reasons that they hired me. This is, again, not a big museum, so they hired a person to be a jack of all trades, and I like to think that, but a tough day at the office is still going to be fascinating because history is fun.
And now you're a podcast star, so there you go. Just add that to your repertoire, I guess. Thanks again, Mark. And we hope you will stop by and take a look around the museum. Maybe you'll see your own story reflected in some of the stories told there. That is going to do it for this episode. We will see you next month here in Hanover.